All right, welcome to our first lesson for chapter 11. This is lesson 11.1. We're going to talk about biodiversity. All of chapter 11 is about biodiversity, but this is just going to be our introduction to it. So learning objective today is that you will be able to describe the different factors that go into an ecosystem's biodiversity. So first, let's talk about what biodiversity is. So diversity of life forms in an ecosystem is what biodiversity is, and it's measured on 3 different levels because diversity of life is more than just the different number of species that we see. So first we could have genetic diversity. That's what we see down here, what this picture at the bottom is trying to show us, is it's diversity in the genes. So it's the variety of genes or inheritable characteristics that are present in a population that comprises its genetic diversity. There's also species diversity, so what we see here, and that's the number of different species and the relative abundance of each in a biological community. And then ecosystem diversity is the variety of ecosystems present in the biosphere. So like forests versus deserts versus grasslands, that is ecosystem diversity. So all of those things are different levels of biodiversity. When we are looking at biodiversity, species richness is one of the first things that we commonly think about. So in practice, the most common measure of biodiversity is the number of species, but that's not what all of biodiversity is, like we just talked about. So when we're looking at just the number of species, that is actually called species richness. So if we look at the species richness of Earth, so how many species we have on Earth, we have only described 2.2 million. So human beings have identified and described and documented 2.2 million species on Earth. However, this is a huge underestimate. There are way more species on Earth. Estimates of total diversity range from billions to trillions of species totally here on Earth. So we can only get to so many places, we can only see so many things. So we as human beings have not even come close to describing and finding all the different species on Earth. High R, which is species richness, is generally a good sign of an ecosystem health. More species means more quality resources like water and soil. All right, and going beyond just looking at how many species we have, we also need to look at the evenness. So we must distinguish between species richness and species diversity. Species diversity takes into account the number and evenness of species. And evenness is a measure of how all of the individual organisms in an ecosystem are balanced between the different species. So these 2 forest communities, we have community 1. Each one of these has species A, B, C, and D. Community 1 has 25% of each. Community 2 down here is 80% A, a little bit of B, a little bit of C, and 10% of D. So communities with a more even abundance among species are more diverse. So if you look at these 2, this one is much more even. It's perfectly even across the board. This community is more diverse than this community. And when we're looking at the pictures, we can see that really clearly. This community is mostly A, which looks like a sort of oak tree. There are tons of it. And while we do have B, C, and D, so the species richness is the same. Each forest has 4 species. Community 1 is much more diverse because it's a lot more even. Community 2 is not very diverse. Evenness indicates if there are 1 or 2 dominant species or population sizes are well balanced. So it's very even, it's going to be more balanced. If it's not very even, that means there's 1 or 2 dominant species. And that's not to say that that is bad, but it is less diverse, and it can be a sign of lower ecosystem health, or at least less resistance to change. All right, so let's talk a little bit about functional diversity beyond just diversity of species. Functional diversity is the diversity of functions that organisms carry out. The loss of any one organism from an ecosystem may not have a large impact if other species are carrying out that same function still exist. So if it is, eating a specific plant, or plants that are really good at clearing out water, whatever it is, whatever the function is that we're looking at, as long as one species is still able to do that function, the ecosystem should be okay. But if we lose all species responsible for that function, then the impact's going to be a lot more severe. So the impact will be severe if a species with a unique function is lost, like beavers. No one does things like beavers do, cutting down trees, creating dams, creating new habitat, severely changing that ecosystem. If beavers were native to an ecosystem and lost, that would have a huge impact. A species carrying out a function in a unique way is lost, or if many species performing the same function are lost and that function can no longer be carried out. So why do we care about biodiversity? So for an ecosystem's sake, we care about biodiversity because of ecosystem resilience. And that's the ability of an ecosystem to return to its original condition after a major disturbance, like a windstorm, fire, flood, clear cutting. So or even disease. So the more diverse an ecosystem is, the more likely it is to be able to kind of like bounce back from that disaster after it happens. Higher species diversity means higher ecosystem resilience. And high species diversity means more plant species to repopulate disturbed ground, anchor soil, and provide food and habitat for animal species. So if we have a big forest fire that goes through, the grasses are what's going to come back first, and that's photosynthesis, bringing energy into the ecosystem. It's providing the base of the food chain for the animals to come back and start that ecosystem, rebuilding. And then for humans, we also care about biodiversity for ourselves because we get direct economic value, meaning there is money to be made in a way directly because of biodiversity. So maintaining biodiversity has a direct economic value to humans. We depend on plants and animals for food, clothing, energy, and medicine. And most of the world's food crops come from just a few species. So if something happened to those species, we would need to be able to rely on the wild species to serve as reservoirs of desirable genetic traits that may be needed to improve commercial crop species. A lot of the crops that we are eating, consuming, are GMOs or have been genetically modified in some way or selected for in their history. So reserving those wild species so that we can maybe pull some of the genes from there are important to our food supply, maintaining, staying stable and being able to resist some of the negative effects that could come in the future. And then indirect economic value, a healthy biosphere provides many services to humans. So indirect means we're not directly making money from it. It's not directly protecting our money, but it does in a way save us money. So green plants provide oxygen and remove carbon dioxide. And natural processes also provide drinking water. And then there's also aesthetic and scientific values. So biodiversity and healthy ecosystems have those values. They're pretty to look at, and also we are able to study them and gain scientific knowledge. But it's difficult to assign economic value to those things. And many people have tried to assign economic value to this indirect, so like getting the clean water, getting clean air, and a lot of those estimates are up in the trillions of dollars. So it's hard to measure, but we know that it is worth it to protect the biodiversity of the world around. All right, that is the end of lesson 1. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will see you in the next one.